our budget work session. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Here.
Mrs. Shea?
Here.
John Freed?
Here.
Scott Lee?
Here.
Brian Tobin? In the event of an emergency, visitors are advised that they may exit the tube from one side door to the parking lot. In the event of an emergency, everyone is asked to leave away from the building and do not attempt to leave in your automobiles, since this may cause traffic problems and block incoming emergency vehicles.
So at this time, I'm going to ask if the board wants to move out to the front row so they can see the presentation better. So for the sake of distancing, we're going to be spread around a little bit. I'm going to pass off the presentation to Mr. Scheid, who's going to start and present most of the information. There'll be a couple of times that, I'll add in on some different things, but at this point, Mr. Scheid, it's your show.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to start the process of the 21-22 proposed budget. Dr. Moore and I have met with the various department heads over the past few weeks to go through the budget. And I can tell you overall, their budget presentation there, what they have proposed is very reasonable. And again, I think it was a very smooth process from the beginning. We'll start with tonight. Mainly, we're going to go through some reserves, fund balance. We're going to talk about revenues in detail. And we'll go through the timeline, but basically next week we'll do the administrative presentation, getting more into the expenses. So just to let you know, basically in the 21-22, the budget we have now, we definitely anticipate that it's going to be within the tax cap. We still have some work to do, but it's very reasonable that we will be within the tax cap. What is the tax cap? So we'll get into these slides. It's going to be 1.83% is the limit for the tax levy increase. Important things, just want to a couple of bullet points to mention. We're still going to have the two full-time security guards, right? We have one at each school, 8 hours a day, and for certain events also.
One at each school, right?
One at each school.
That almost makes it look like...
Oh, exactly. Right, sorry about that, yes. Most program staffing, basically, it's a roll forward. It's nice to see the health insurance, the East End Health Plan increase was only 1.25%. Again, very reasonable, especially again with this tax cap. Sometimes with double digits, it's an obstacle to get the budget. But again, health insurance, it's a great sign. It is a question mark going forward with the COVID, how health insurance will be. We'll have to keep an eye on it. Some of the big things we look at, well, teachers' retirement system. Our salaries are roughly $12 million or so in the budget, and we pay the retirement system. It's a modest increase, as you see, 9.53 to 9.8. That's a little under 3%. Again, not too bad. Very, very happy, actually. And we'll talk about the reserves that we have for that. We'll get into, we still have a transfer to capital line. We're still in discussions on the amount, but we'll get into more detail with that shortly.
So just a couple quick comments on that. This is our first run of the budget, so our numbers don't meet exactly. We're probably off by just, we're very close. We're off by just about a little over 100,000. We have not finalized staffing or gone through. So like when it says programs and staffing will remain intact, the staffing for the programs that we have will remain intact, but that's contingent on our enrollment. And as our enrollment changes, that could change our staffing also. So we may have one more, one less teacher, depending on what we need, but it will be consistent staffing to keep all of our programs intact, not necessarily the same exact staffing.
Okay, just to start, we're just a little bit about the information from the prior year where we're kind of, in a way, starting from. Unassigned fund balance, it's kind of the rainy day fund. That is, at June 2020, $1,223,000. That represents, it is limited to 4% of our budget, and that's right where we are at and right where we should be. Same thing with the prior year. So again, that's just, we hopefully just keep funding that money, again, for any unknown, unanticipated issues. Appropriated fund balance is basically the monies that we give back to the taxpayers each year. I don't know if you recall in the past, I believe it was almost $1 million years ago. That's too high, because that's basically what that number means is you really want to have that in your budget, not where you know you're going to spend it. So the $300,000 was at that 1% of the budget is just a good place to be, where you can build some contingencies in the budget, because what happens if things are tight in the budget year and you spend that money, you have to collect that money in taxes the following year. So it's a little tricky to explain, appropriate fund balance, but again, that's right where you want to be. We'll talk about the budget has a slight increase this year, but again, very manageable and reasonable. General fund surpluses, so how did we do the last 2 years? You can see last year we had a surplus of $519,000. The year before was $268,000. But again, very good signs. The $519,000 was definitely, with the COVID, with the shutdown of schools in mid-March, have definitely caused almost across the board savings in each category. It's brought some challenges too, but again, overall, it was actually, again, a reduction of known expenses. Our financial balance sheet is still in very good shape. We have a AA2 rating with Moody's. It helps us borrow. We borrow short term each year, again, very low rates. We financed a bond a couple of years ago at 3%. Again, very, very, very good rate. What's interesting, the bond, it's about 10 years left on the life. So as you recall, I think it was a 14-year bond, and we financed, the bond annual amount is about $700,000, which was about 70% of the prior bond. So with that savings, again, we did reduce the tax levy before that. Again, good place to start with the reserves is what's our balance sheet look like? So you can see there's a comparison from June 19 to June 2020. And you can see jumping to the bottom, our reserves increased to $10,273,000. Overall, again, that's a very good sign. Reserves do decrease in total, again, but sometimes there's usually an explanation, like maybe like in the past with the capital reserve, we've used $2 million to offset the capital project, so this way, again, we didn't have to tax the taxpayers. That you'll see a drop in capital as, we build it up and then we use it. The repair reserve, and both capital and repair are very strict rules how to spend it. Basically, repair reserve, you need a hearing. Capital, you need voter approval to spend it. So that money is in there, like I said, but we can't touch it unless the voters approve it. Repair reserve is very active, I'll say. We do use that reserve. There's quite a bit in it, but we're monitoring it, and we do try and just, there's just our facilities, older buildings, plumbing, roofing, masonry. It's just a very nice reserve to have, and it saves our budget. It's this way we don't have to budget a ton in repair expenses, whereas we use that repair reserve. What was interesting, what we did last year, is the insurance reserve is through guidance from the our auditors, the lawyers. We didn't see that it was very useful reserve that of a known benefit. So what we did is we transferred the entire amount to the capital reserve. Because again, the capital reserve, we know it's a utilized reserve where we build it up for potential future projects. And like I said, it was just a better use of our monies. I did want to keep some money in there, just as an FYI, you know, 100,000, 200,000, but they recommended we transfer the whole thing out. A couple of years ago, what's new is the TRS reserve, which is strictly for the teachers' retirement system. So this year, as of June 2020, we have 432,000, and now for next year, we're going to start using that to offset, as I discussed earlier, the TRS rates increase. The ERS reserve, which we've had for a while, again, about 980,000. Again, right where you want to be, it's a several years, maybe 3 years worth of expenses. And again, a big chunk of we don't collect taxes for is 170,000 that offsets those expenses, again, as a revenue source. Workers' comp, what it says, just it's used for workers' comp claims. Basically, we've been keeping it flat. That's 73,000 as a revenue source is equal to what the expense budget is. Exactly, it's the premium, it's the annual cost. Sometimes, I think it was about a year or two ago, we did have a, I was going to say unforeseen, but we had a closing of a case that was a decent amount above and beyond, and instead of lowering our cash position, we increased the budget and funded the workers' comp reserve to use it. Yes, it was unknown, unforeseen. We had the board that did approve it. You know, we could have let it build up, but that just meant we would be in a worse position. So there was a specific claim for that amount. And again, we increased the budget because again, that's in the good years, you fund the reserves. And then in years when you can, you offset the expense.
So this 73,000 that we're using, that's to fund the premium?
Exactly, the 73,000 is the premium. Okay. Exactly. Unemployment, so that's an interesting reserve. And typically, we've had very little claims. You can see it was we funded from 130,000 to 180. That was just, again, because of COVID, we did have an increase in our unemployment for people, maybe like subs and so forth. The other interesting with unemployment, which is a recent, is the fraudulent activity. It's almost across the board with municipalities, from what I'm hearing. Oh, really? Private too? Okay.
I got a claim for myself.
Oh, really? It's interesting. What we've seen is the couple that we've had, they have the right name, they have the social security, they have the wrong addresses. We've seen it's common that they have like maybe their parents' address. What we do is we protest it based on our guidance, and what's interesting, that person typically receives it also, and we reach out to them and they protest it also. So we're not going to, we haven't been billed for any that I recall, because sometimes it might work out if we have to pay first and get the money back, but we're definitely keeping an eye on it, making sure we have to do whatever legally. Oh, already paid? Okay. Right, I think we pay it roughly quarterly, and like I said, I'm pretty sure we haven't paid it, but because it's so, I'm pretty sure I didn't want to, I don't think they think the recommendation is for us not to pay it. But again, we just we'll follow the rules and continue to monitor it and go forward. The Employee Benefit Accrued Liability Reserve, that's strictly for payouts when employees retire and leave the district for sick time. The 80,000 is just an estimate for one person or two people, one or two people. If nobody retires, that reserve doesn't get used. If more people retire, it might be something where same thing as earlier, I mentioned, they increase the budget funded by the reserves. And again, it saves the budget where you don't have to take it out of, find it somewhere else in the budget. Okay, and like I said, the total, the 380,000 is a little bit of a decent jump from prior years. We'll talk about it soon. And the reserve balance is a little higher than typical, again, because our theory was, let's fund the reserves with some of the surplus, because when Dr. Moore and I will talk about it, the upcoming years are kind of, there's some question marks of what's going to go on in the future. So we're going to talk about the tax cap calculation. So one of the items that we're allowed to increase our tax levy is by the tax growth factor. So that's given to us. You can see it's been a high of 1%. Next year, it's 0.82%. And again, this is I'll show you the calculation. So that's actually a little higher than I'll say our average. I would think we typically will see 0.6% or so. So that's, again, it's basically, I call it the assessed valuation change, the brick and mortar changes with the town. The other factor is the Consumer Price Index, CPI. So next year, it's at 1.23%. Overall, in the past 10 years, I mean, that's the second lowest. It was in 16, 17, as you can see, I think it was 0.13. It's where the misnomer with CPI, people think it's, 2% increase, but a lot of times there's other factors, and a lot of times we don't even get to the 2%, as again, this is the case. So, not horrible, but not great. So here's our actual calculation. To start at the top, our levy for the current year, the 2021 year, is $27,600,000. And what's interesting to make sure to note, that is $200,000 under what the cap was last year. So as you recall, we decided, again, to the taxpayers to try and help them out, in my opinion, what we tried to do. So like I said, we were able to reduce it by $200,000, and like I said, to pass it on to the taxpayers. But that's basically our starting point to $27,600,000. So some of those percentages that I just went over, you'll see we added 0.82% for the growth factor. And a couple lines down, we added the Consumer Price Index adjustment to 1.23%. And the other calculation is capital cost, which is basically our debt service, our bond payments, offset by building aid. There is also an estimate for some expenses that we might do through interfund transfers. So you can see the 790, which is a reduction. The counterpart, so to speak, is the increase is to 737, so roughly the same. So with that going down, you can see the new tax cap is $28,106,560. So that's an increase of $506,000, or 1.83%. It was interesting to talk to Dr. Moore and just to try to come up with some estimated tax billings. So if an average house is assessed at $7,000, the estimated tax increase would be $115 annually. I'm sorry?
I don't have a copy of that.
Oh, maybe you have an older. Okay, yeah, because I'm sorry. So I added this one today. I will. I'll provide it. Okay. If you want to calculate based on what your different your house is, it's $91.36 for every $100 of assessed valuation. This estimated increase would be 1.645 per $100 of assessed valuation if you want to just get the increase. I do base the assessed valuation, I keep it based on the latest information that I have, which is basically from December of 2020. If I do get better information, I'll update it. I know I've looked at the trend. We typically, the assessed valuation either stays the same or has increased. That we have not seen any kind of dramatic drop. So the increased assessed valuation basically means your increase is lower than what I project. Typically, I usually don't have a slide on state aid. I mean, I'll have maybe Dr. Morrow start on this, but this year it's definitely interesting.
So if you read the newspapers or you listen to the press conferences, there was a huge increase in state aid this year, $2.1 billion. Unfortunately, that really didn't equate to increases in aid in local budgets. There were some districts that had increases, but they also counted different things like STAR in there, federal subsidy in there. So when it came out at the end, Southold had a $37,000 decrease in their budget in the first run, and this is an important thing to remember. Just like this is the first run of our budget, this is also the first run of the state budget. Typically, when it comes out as a final budget, those numbers will change. Rarely do they ever go down. They don't go up drastically, but they rarely ever go down. So, our budget was really pretty much flat. We have pretty much the same foundation aid as we had last year. The biggest concern in this year's budget is that $3.8 billion that comes from the stimulus fund. That's federal money that we're being given this year. And what the state did was they took hundreds of thousands of dollars out of each budget and they supplemented it with that stimulus money. The stimulus money will only be given for 1 year. So next year, there's going to be a $400,000 to $500,000 shortfall unless it's replaced by the state. That's the concern with our budget, and that's why you'll notice that our budget is so tight. Our levy at 1.83 doesn't even make it doesn't even make up for the increases we have in insurances and salaries and contracts in the year. Yet we're looking at trying to tighten up everywhere else and utilize reserves to make sure that we keep our budget tight, because the next couple of years are they're question marks, and I have some concerns about them. Excuse me. The good part is that Southold has done an excellent job in building reserves up. We did have a surplus last year because we weren't spending money on a lot of things at the end of last year because we weren't in school at the end of last year. So although we were spending money on certain things, we weren't spending it on everything. We were able to put that money into different reserve areas so that we can use them next year, the year after, the year after. So the hope is that as we work through the next couple of years, that good planning that you guys have engaged in over the last decade puts us in a position where we can be successful and maintain the meaningful programs that we've had here. But it's going to come with a very we're keeping a close eye on everything, because there's just too many question marks as we go forward. The whole STAR program, I'm going to let Chuck explain, because to this day I'm confused about it and how it actually works. But I do know that STAR never showed up in our state aid runs in the past, and this year it did, which attributed to the appearance of an increase. It's I'm sure not purposeful, but it does create a scenario where people look at the bottom line and it looks like, there's a lot more money than there really is. We're flat. The 37,000 in the size of our budget is not really a substantial number. So our budget is flat, but our costs are going up in a way that's not flat. So we're going to figure out how to make the numbers work. We're going to figure out how to, when we have to adopt a budget, the bottom lines on both of them are equal. But we're going to figure it out in a way where we don't have to eliminate any of our meaningful programs that we have.
Great. And as Dr. Morrow mentioned, it's again, which is something we have to keep to monitoring. Let me have it go to the next slide, because to talk about STAR, well, we can go back. I'm just looking at so for this current year, we collected roughly $800,000 from STAR. No, I take it back. I'm sorry, that wasn't looking at my budget. So we collected $766,000 for STAR. So that's what I'm going to put in the budget for next year. We collected $819,000 the year before, $954,000 the year before. So STAR fluctuates based on, right, that's the state's relief program to taxpayers. So budget-wise, it's never been a concern since I have no control over it. And what I do is I give the town our levy. So for this year, I told them we need to collect $27,600,000. How that comes in doesn't necessarily, it concerns me, but there's not much I can do. And what happens is if there's $700,000-800,000 of STAR that we get directly from the state, the town gives us the other difference. So overall, it just makes us whole. So it's calculation of the tax levy, or, a part of it. It's never been part of state aid. So again, as Dr. Morrow mentioned, it's a little confusing why it is. And for now, basically, I ignored it in the state aid runs. Because like I said, whatever they collect, it's an issue kind of between the state and the taxpayers. Something, of course, we'll continue to monitor. But like I said, it's just another curveball, and they also changed how they group certain state aids together on the runs. Again, just seems to make things more confusing. So this is just going into some of the main revenue categories. As we talked about, 1.83 for the tax levy increase. So state aid, what I did is I broke it out into two pieces. And you can see last year, the current year, 2021, $1.7 million. And in the 21-22 runs, it's $1.4 million. But you have to go to the next line. Again, as Dr. Morrow mentioned, we're collecting next year an anticipated $470,000 in stimulus funds. And again, the question is what's going to happen a year or two down the road. This year, in the 2021, we did file for the CARES Act, the $150,000 and change. As hopefully you recall, that money was not extra, so we spent it for COVID, but we claimed it, but it wasn't additional funds to reimburse us. They held back $150,000 in other state aid. Yeah. So
Yes.
They just gave us money in a different pocket.
Basically, we had higher expenses, but we still had.
Yes. If you were to look at the budget for Southold, that was up on the website last year when I was in the process of interviewing, where it says state aid and where it says state aid federal cares, those two numbers were one number in your budget for last year. Because Southold got approximately 1.85 million in state aid was the expectation last year. When our state aid run actually came through, they had reduced it by $157,665 and gave us the ability to collect that in a different way. It's the same thing as what they're doing next year. If you look at the $1,409,718 where it says state aid under 21-22, and then you look at the 470, that combined together is what would have been our state aid next year had they not utilized stimulus funds. The big concern is that that almost $500,000 next year is only there next year. So New York State will have to come up with that, I forget what the number was, whatever the billions of dollars that they're putting into everybody's budget. And our number of 500,000 is quite honestly relatively small. There are districts that are relying on $8 million, $12 million in that aid. So, that's the concern, is really not 21-22. The concern is, yes, it's the whole, and it's if you remember the gap, the gap elimination that we had, this is setting up to be very similar to that. And, the difference is that it won't be prolonged for years and then we'll fall off the cliff. It'll, there'll be a $500,000 hurdle a couple years down the road, or the state will figure out how to fund that money back into budgets. I just don't see where those billions of dollars come from in a year. So.
Okay. We do get money reimbursements for our ROTC program. It's going to be relatively flat. We have seen a drop in, because they don't, in some of their expenses, meaning they do some trips and busing. But again, that's been kept at a flat level. For shared personnel, relatively flat, roughly 200,000. Shared sports was interesting that with again, COVID and, is sports going to happen? Are they going to cancel? Is it back? So I reduced it. again, just there's so much uncertainty with somehow the expenses, what we're going to pay. I think in the beginning we still kept the teams separate. We each had a coach and doing intramurals, so I just felt it's safe to just kind of lower that projection. And like I said, hopefully things will get back to normal quickly. The other ROTC revenues is what we collect from the difference between the program and what we get from the government. We collect evenly, right, because the ROTC program is split between the 3 schools, Mattituck, Greenport, and Southold. We host it, so we run all our expenses. We get reimbursed $130,000 or so from the federal government, and then the difference is billed to the other schools based on enrollment. So we collect some out-of-district tuition, mainly from either New Suffolk or some from Greenport. I did bump it up, really just try and help match the budget. We do collect more. I think we at least collect $250,000 or so we collected this past year. Enrollment seems to be relatively flat. I want to say 12 to 14 kids or so from New Suffolk. Appropriate fund balance is what I mentioned before. There was just a slight bump, just to kind of try and just match the expense budget with the revenue budget. Again, it's very manageable. Use of reserves. So as I mentioned, what it's a small, I mean, so it's 16%. It's a decent percent, but it's 55,000. We're still looking at it. That number probably will still change because that's what reserves are for, to use them. So I anticipate we'll probably bump that up. Use the reserves when, that we've been saving during good times to offset, the current budgets.
Can I say something about that at this point, about the use of reserves? Because I can speak, and Patty can concur with me from the East End Health Plan perspective. No, that's okay, I'm sure. Is that the East End Health Plan kept the rates low or lowered them a lot because they felt that we had reserves, a rainy day fund, and it's raining now. Let's face it, it's raining. The East End Health Plan chose to use, not all of it obviously, was very smart about the amount that they used, and I think the district should do the same thing.
Yeah.
We told our taxpayers for years and years, this is why we're doing what we're doing for that rainy day. And personally, this is just my opinion, I think it's raining now.
Right.
And that's, yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be raining next year. That's why that sounds reasonable.
Yes. And the truth is that amount, it was our starting amount. As we try to work away the 120, I think we were at about $129,000 difference between what our budgeted amount for next year was and the number that we're really at. So we need to whittle down that 129. I think 25,000 went off today. As we look at each of our programs, we sometimes have things on the books that shouldn't have been on the books and they've just been rolled over. So we'll go through all of that, and then it's possible those numbers might be adjusted by a little bit, because I tend to agree with you. And this is a reasonable, in my opinion, this is a very reasonable amount for next year. There may be years in the next couple where we may have to use more if we want to keep our programs. But we have an ample amount of reserves to do that. If it's going to be over, you can't plan to use reserves to keep a program for 30 years, because then you run out of reserves. But I agree with you, it's raining. I think it's going to pour in the next couple of years. Yeah, yes. We've sat and talked about it. We've switched things into grant funding that we normally would not put in grant funding, to completely use up the majority of our grants, so that we could have some surplus that we could put back into reserves after this year, so that we can then utilize them in applying them back to the budget the following year. So those things that you're talking about, we've been doing. Our look at this is a 3-year look. It's not, we're not planning for next year. Next year, quite honestly, really is not a hard year, because they have this huge stimulus package. We're planning for the years after next year. That's really what we're looking at for now, and we're in a solid position for years to come. There's been a lot of talk about it. There's been no full action on it. What we've done, there are certain reserves that you can adjust up and down and utilize them for exactly what they're supposed to be used for. And then that releases money from what you would have normally used in your budget to shift over to COVID expenses. So in essence, if you use your TRS reserve, if you use more of your TRS reserve to fund TRS, then more of your general budget can be shifted to spending money on COVID. So they're, you know, they haven't loosened the reins as much as we would like them to, but there are definitely fallback positions that will allow us to use reserve money for exactly those purposes.
I was thinking in terms of almost the repair reserve, because I think a lot of things like shields and those kinds of things are full of repair. It's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah,
If it really is in fact for repair and space, social repair.
yeah. Yeah, so they've talked about it, and you know, we can look into it. It's possible, certainly, to look into it. Yeah.
Right, yes, definitely, right, we'll continue.
The health and safety allowable.
Yeah, and
So,
we've,
right, if you could, what we did this year, we did appropriate unassigned fund balance to pay for COVID expenses. I promised Dr. Moore I'm going to try and do a fund balance projection by the end of the month to kind of see where we stand, because what I feel is we're also, the savings are continuing. I think our out of district tuition is still reasonable and under control. So I anticipate this year we're still looking very good. So meaning that we will really be able to absorb the COVID cost. We'll get into some, exactly. You know, I just see supplies and kind of, yeah, it seems across the board. Again, we'll try and get it more thorough by the end of the month. Well, I will do it by the end of the month. But yes, definitely using the reserves more. Like you said, I agree. You know, it's going to happen. You know, the downside which you have to keep an eye on is that when the reserves are gone, they're gone. So I'm hearing a lot of districts, sometimes I don't want to say, but they might be using all of it, or if they use half of it. That just means the problem that they're gone the following year. And like I said, we're here for the long term, so we'll come up with a decent plan that, you know, we need to sustain for the future, and to come up with the balancing act, because the taxpayers fund a bulk of the budget. And again, I think we're in much better shape than other districts who rely a lot more on state aid. So that's, you know, that's just a back and forth and come to a meeting point for its fair. So I mentioned my use of reserves. Again, I mentioned we'll keep looking at that, and some of these are the miscellaneous. E-rate monies from refunds of BOCES. We have seen an uptick, so I just increased the budget, $18,000. So right now our revenue budget is looking at $31,620,000, a $600,000 increase, or a relatively low 1.97%. Like I said, we still have some more homework to do to balance the budgets, but again, we'll get it done within the tax cap over the next couple of weeks. I'm not going to go through each one. I kind of did go through them again. It's just some of the reserves. And again, I mentioned it's important to note again, capital repair. We do need voter approval for capital to spend it. Repairs, again, we have the hearing each year. We probably due to have another one soon. We try and have maybe roughly one a year with the list of the projects. And again, generally, we've always used those reserves for the purpose that it's like workers' comp unemployment for those claims. So I was just trying to say, because what's unique this year, obviously, again, the COVID-19. So just a couple of numbers. To date, we have been tracking in a separate code supplies that are directly and clearly COVID. So these are just supplies, cleaning materials, equipment. What is it, the UVC machines, the desk shields. So since, there's 2 fiscal years since March, but we've spent $256,000 in those codes. As I mentioned, we claimed $150,000 of those for the CARES Act that we're still waiting. I believe they're going to look at those. We had to file as a grant that they're in the process of still reviewing them. So some of the other things, we also have a salary code for people coming in early to do temperature checks of the students. Again, today it's about $14,800. Other costs we don't have a specific number for that's in the budget is we're seeing a lot of, say, online subscriptions. We're seeing less money maybe for textbooks. Again, now the kids, just more of a remote learning costs. Mr. Gregorio had additional budget costs last year. We have in the, mailing more ballots. Even this year's May is still up in the air what they will have. So there's other costs in there that we just haven't captured that's just, again, in the regular budget.
We don't know if this budget will be in person or
We'll say that again, you don't know?
No, they haven't decided, they haven't indicated yet. My best guess would be it's going to be a combination. They're going to have probably an in-person opportunity and then a mail-in opportunity also. That'd be my best guess, but
At my recent meeting, district clerk meeting with council, right now it's scheduled to be an in-person voting.
yeah.
With perhaps COVID as a reason for an absentee ballot for those.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, that would be my best guess, is that it's going to end up that way. Things, just one note on point 3, as much as this has been a difficult time and we've had to really work to keep kids in school and to do some of these things, it has sped along some of those processes as we've been looking to change some of our textbooks to digital now that we have a full one-to-one initiative. And, this year kind of forced our hand with some of those things. So we're not, those subscriptions and the additional costs that may come from getting digital textbooks or online subscriptions to certain things, we're looking at shifting monies out of we're not going to buy a traditional textbook and a digital textbook, in the future. We're going to look to move towards where we can have an updated textbook every year because it's going to be on your Chromebook, rather than, sitting there with a book that's 4 years old in social studies class when, the last 4 years worth of history is not in there. So it kind of gave us a nudge in that direction, which is, was an unintended positive, and our teachers should get, a great deal of credit for embracing some of those things and giving their students opportunities with them and helping us move in that direction.
Okay, yeah, the only thing I just thought of, just kind of mention is, keep an eye on it, is transportation. We haven't had any increased expenses for transportation. We are bringing all the high school kids back, which I believe it's Monday. All grades will be back, and the elementary has been back. Our ridership has been relatively low, which is a good thing. I think it's great. Basically parents are helping out and transporting when they can. But that's just, again, an area that we're looking at to make sure, what the ridership looks like.
When it comes to COVID, as much as we have had expenses that look large, our expenses comparatively have been extremely reasonable, and all of the credit for that goes to the community, the Board of Ed, everybody who has worked and ran this district for years. Our class sizes and our supports that we had in place, and the size of our buildings and the size of our population, allowed us to provide for our students in a safe manner where many other places didn't have the ability to do that. There are districts that added in excess of 2,000 teachers this year just to be able to get 60% of their population in. We did not. We didn't have to. We did have to add some things, and it did cost us money, but relatively, the planning and the structure and the support that you've had in this community for class sizes and spaces and things like that for so many years provided us with opportunities that our COVID expenses this year they didn't even surpass the surplus savings of not being open the end of last year. So, some of these things that you talk about using reserve, and we're not pulling it straight out of reserve, but what we're doing is using it and then just not putting it into reserve. So it ends up being those same monies that were not allocated. We didn't take them from other things to do it. So we provided our students and our community with everything we were able to and everything we had, yet still we're able to afford these. And, like I said, the groundwork that has been done for many years here, hopefully not for this reason, did pay huge dividends for us as a school district and as a community. So it should be noted that that was the only reason that we were really able to do it.
Okay, and just kudos to Mr. Dragone and his staff with the facilities. I know they've been doing a tremendous job cleaning the bathrooms throughout the day and installing the desk shields and cleaning the shields and stuff, and ordering all the supplies and keeping up with everything. It's really been very impressive. Just a couple of dates, reminders. So next week, a week from today, is the administrative presentations. I'm also going to have more on the expense side of the budget. We have another meeting on the 14th. As of now, the April 21st is the date that it's anticipated for the board to adopt the budget, and the budget vote is on May 18th. Okay, so that's all I have. Any further questions?
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
It didn't come to order.
We kind of did. Patty brought us to it. Do you have anything else, Dr. Morrow?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn. Second?
Come on down there, you got a
Second. All in favor? Thank you. See you next week.
Yep. Chuck, thank you.
I gotta